I started teaching interior design in the year 2000. And when I did that, I soon realized or felt that what interior design was about, certainly as a starting point for me, was very much this idea of adaptation and changing what exists. Interior designers don't make new things, they change things that already exist. And so most of my writing has been about how and why people change things, change buildings in different cultural situations. It's not strictly history, it's about stories. I want to put to you a particular analogy. I'm going to put two analogies to you. And the first analogy is the idea of a story. So here's a famous story for you, Little Red Riding Hood. Okay, you've all heard of Little Red Riding Hood, the story. Okay, where did you hear the story of Little Red Riding Hood? Anyone? Sorry? You read it in what? Did you read the original version? Do you think? When do you think it was written? No, it was never written. Little Red Riding Hood is a story that was passed down from generation to generation to generation. It might be several thousands of years old, okay? And we have no idea what the original version is. The only version you know is the last one you heard. The only version we know of many stories is the last one we heard. And I want to put to you the first analogy, the first idea, that the only version of a building we know is the last one we've seen. Because for all the hundreds of years that buildings have existed, they've led all sorts of lives and done all sorts of things that we know nothing about. And those are different to what we might expect them to be. So buildings change continuously over time. Okay, buildings change continuously over time. Even a new building like this, I suspect, has already changed. I'm sure that there are all sorts of things that they've had to repair in the building. I can see there's some pictures at the back that need to be straightened and so on. And that kind of thing happens all of the time. We're changing buildings all of the time. And when it comes to interiors, that happens even faster. Okay, when it comes to interiors, that happens even faster because interiors move. So we're in a class today, and I suspect there've already been maybe 2 or 3 classes in here before us, and there'll be 2 or 3 classes in here after us. And in 5 years' time, these chairs will have worn out, and they'll buy some new chairs. And in 10 years' time, the desks will have worn out, and they'll realize they need to paint the walls a different color and replace the ceiling. Interiors change and move and shift all the time. Okay, so it's a really, really important part of it. And so what I'm here to do, why I've come to India in the past couple of months, is to study how that happens in this country. So I'm working in 2 very different locations. One of them relates to the glass room in Araula, a small palace in Rajasthan that I'm going to talk to you about today. The other, which I'm about to go to on Monday, is a completely different world, is a Victorian railway and coal mining town in West Bengal called Asansol, a completely different universe where, in a sense, historical buildings are being eaten up by industrial processes all of the time. It's a very different process of change. So now I want to take you to Rajasthan, where I just came from. Here is where I was yesterday. A panther ran across the road as I was on the way to the station. And Ganarao, the small town I'm going to talk about, is in a county called Godwar, which is in between 2 Rajasthani kingdoms. So on the one hand, there's Mewar, focused around Udaipur, on the other Marwar, focused around Jodhpur. And in between those 2 kingdoms are the Aravalli mountains. And the town of Ganarao, the village of Ganarao, sits exactly on the border between those 2 kingdoms. Those 2 kingdoms didn't like each other very much, so you can guess what games the Thakurs of Ganarao have had to play over many centuries, caught in between these 2 places. They are also hereditarily the guardians of the fortress of Kumbhalgarh on the mountain on the border between Marwar and Mewar. It's a small manor house, a village here in the middle of the village. This is part of the manor house. This is not a palace. It's not a fort. It's not a grand place on an enormous tourist destination. It's a family home, which has evolved over several years. And you can see those two kind of matching windows in the big yellow wall. That's the room I'm going to be talking to you about on the second floor of the building. And if we go up there, what we find is a kind of antechamber, these arches, and then what they lead into. So I first went here in 2011, so a long time ago. It was monsoon. It was a kind of wet, dark, sweaty, horrible time of year to be in a place like this. And I was in this castle, and one night I was the only person there. There was me and the steward. And one night the steward opened the door and he showed me this. He showed me this extraordinary glass room hidden in the second floor of this Rowler. I was only there for a day, but somehow this room that I'd seen in the darkness, made of glass, really caught my imagination. And 10 years later, or 8 years later, in 2019, I went back there. I got in touch with the people at Ganara, and I said, I'd like to come back to study this room in more detail. And what I went back to do is what I'm going to talk to you about. But before I do that, I want to sort of introduce you to the room with a short video. Now, if the sound doesn't work wherever you are, don't worry too much. If it does, lie back and...
I don't know what to do. There is a shard of glass lying on the windowsill, which seems to be painted with an ear. I pick it up and hold it against the broken face of the European princess fixed to the wall. It fits perfectly, completing her inscrutable expression. And I don't know what to do. Part of me suffers the urge to take the shard with me, away as a souvenir. The way things are going, I tell myself, it could soon be the only part of the room left. Part of me thinks it would be good to at least hide it in a cupboard somewhere else in the castle for safekeeping. But something tells me that it will be no safer in a cupboard than here on the windowsill, and besides, if anybody found it, they would have no idea what it was. And so there's a third option, to do nothing at all. Besides which, I'm far too filthy to be touching this precious jewel. It has been 7 months since the monsoon, and the air is so dry that the plaster in the room is on the verge of becoming dust. Once or twice, my hands brush over the surfaces of the walls, and in the process I am become the destroyer of worlds, reducing tiny carved towers and domes and cities to motes of white powder. Even as I attempt to remember the room, it crumbles away in my hands. I have nowhere to wipe them, as the Kunwa, the crown prince, the young man who will inherit the room, extends his hand to shake mine. The dust dances around his white ironed kirtle and his oiled black hair. He has been out of town at a campaign meeting, he tells me. He's standing for Parliament. His ancestors once commanded the dues of this land and its people, but now he has to earn their votes. He has been hard at work, he says, improving them, planting trees, clearing wells, building schools. And he has been hard at work in the castle as well. It has been an hotel for a while. It's often the only economic option for old places like this in the new India. And it has been, very deliberately, a low-key one. If guests complain about the service, says his mother, I remind them that the servants got there first. But her son is not so sure that he's going to cut the mustard with the new local tourists who are less charmed than Westerners by old colonial mores. And so the castle is clouded in the dust of a construction site. Workmen have scraped back layer after layer of the whitewash that since British times has been applied to the stonework after every monsoon. Here and there, their work reveals, preserved under the formless white emulsion, crisp sandstone carvings and colourful wall paintings. He shows me photographs of some of them. Bold, graphic and flat, they're nothing like the paintings in the glass room. It's an artful balance, he says, this art of refurbishment. There's no point in making a heritage hotel look as good as new, he says, but it has to work. It's a sort of storytelling, a sort of theatre, I venture, and he nods quickly, as if such an observation were either too obvious to be commented upon or quite beyond him. But we don't know what to do with this one, he says, and he gestures around him at the mirrored room. It's too small to use, except as a bathroom, and too precious, I think, and it's too broken to restore. The glass, in daylight, has lost its sheen. The silvering of the mirrors has dulled to a grey alloy, spotted with watermarks, and the room no longer doubles and triples itself in their surfaces as it must once have done. Here and there the glass is cracked. Sometimes a circular pattern in its surface records where a pigeon must have attacked its own reflection. There is no way of invisibly repairing glass. Once made, instantaneously or by accident, the cracks must remain as evidence of the happenstance until the time when the room itself ceases to exist. In other rooms, perhaps, one could replace the broken glass, but the removal of the remains of the original from the walls here would destroy the miniature plaster worlds that hold them in place. Besides which, the glass itself is a precious and ancient jewel. Floated in distant England, shipped across the ocean, painted upon by an unknown oriental hand, and then brought to this room, this place, in which glass was more or less unknown at the time. In some places, the glass has fallen away, revealing beneath it another layer of plaster, and where that has fallen away, sheets of linen or cotton, reduced to lace by termites, and beneath that, the crisp stone architecture of the castle itself, as it must once have been before anyone thought of containing it in this tiny room. Slipped in between those layers, on the plaster exposed by the broken glass, are almost imperceptible patterns. At first, I think the dark lines that form them are cracks, or a spider's web so old that it has become covered in black dust. But a closer inspection reveals that they have in fact been made by the brush of a miniature painter. And these little lines make another landscape of palaces and cities, queens and gods, kings and embassies. There's nothing unusual in that. This is something that happens in every interior. Scrape back the paint or the wallpaper, and you'll find another layer, and another, and another, and another. Every room is a composite of all the rooms it has ever been. But there's something different going on here, for in that once hidden layer, only the lines of initial sketches are present. They form not just the ruins of an interior that has disappeared, but the ruins of one that was never completed and was covered up. I look at the couloir. I don't know, he says. I don't know what happened. And now we just don't know what to do. Neither do I. Do nothing and the room will shatter and crumble into powder. Restore it, and that whole hidden world that might have been disappears forever. Preserve it as it is, for what? And so the sun and air moves on to the next project, and I look down, and I remember that I'm holding the shard of glass in my hands. The glass of the portrait that is still on the wall has bowed slightly, and so I slip the painted shard into the little gap that has opened up behind it. One day, perhaps, someone will know what to do with it. but not yet.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so what do we do with a room like this? What do we do with a situation like this? An incredibly fragile, tiny space hidden away, not in some vast public monument, but in a small private house. So what have I done? Well, the first thing I set out to do was to do perhaps what any architect who's trained would do, and that you sit down and you go, right, now what I'm going to do is try and measure it. And so I produced, while I was there in 2019, sketch drawings of the building and measured it. And then when I got back to the UK and during lockdown, I produced a whole series of digital drawings of the room. And somehow I kind of felt that this would tell me something, that it would kind of reveal something about the room that I didn't know. Something about its proportions or its geometry or something like that, or at least quite simply just how big it was. But of course, there's a whole set of experience that drawings like this just can't communicate about a room like that. This tells me nothing of all the stories that you've just heard. It's just an architectural drawing, a diagram, nothing more. And so what I also did at the same time was I'd been taking thousands of photographs while I was there, and I collaged these and the sketch itself into the drawing so that one could see all the patterns and the textures of the surfaces of the room, also how I'd measured it and what those are like. And so I produced a number of these drawings of each floor, ceiling, and each of the elevations of the room, of these kind of images of the room as it was in 2019. And of course, what I realized once I got back to Edinburgh in the UK a year later, and it was the middle of lockdown and there was no chance of coming back here, was that there was loads of things that I'd forgotten to photograph. Because when you set out to survey something, you will always miss something. When you set out to study something, you will always make a mistake. And these drawings aren't about getting things right. They aren't about producing a correct and complete record of this building, but instead are attempts, in some sense, to record partly what it was like to be there, but my own process of kind of attention and drawing to the room. And so in a sense, they're simultaneously a sketch and a drawing. And then it became time to kind of put those together to imagine that if one made a kind of doll's house or a tent out of this room, how would you do it? So that these are drawings in which the walls are folded down from the ceiling, as it were. So you can imagine it as a kind of shamiana. If this was printed out, I did work out how big this would be, and I think it would be about the size of this lecture theatre if I printed it all out in one go. There was no piece of fabric, I think, that could do that, but I did consider it, and that basically has its basis in the sketches and the drawings, and then the digital drawings itself. So the first thing to do was to record this. And of course, like all of us, you know, there I was sitting in my bedroom, stuck at my computer in 2020, kind of wondering what was going to happen to the world. And of course, one thought, certainly having been to this room in the condition that I've been in, is if I came back to India 5 years later, this room might well not exist. It's a room whose pieces are literally crumbling away in my hands as I was trying to measure it. I thought somebody has to try to record something about this room, and it might not exist. Next, I want to move on to some of the stories that the room might have to tell in terms of historical research. So first of all, when was this room made? Okay, when was this room made? And what I'm going to try to do is work back from clues that are in the room itself that might tell us something. So I'm going to focus first of all on the north wall of the building. And what you can see here, there are 3 or 4 niches along the side of this room. And on the right-hand side, you can see Radha and Krishna. If you zoom in there, they're Radha and Krishna by the banks of the river in Mathura and Vrindavan. And what you can see at the bottom of the wall is a particular scene. And I'm going to focus a little bit on this scene. So these were some digital scans. None of this had been invented when I went there in 2019. It's all slightly different now. So here is this frieze at the bottom. And so I'm just going to do a quick cultural questionnaire here. Hands up if anybody recognizes this building. Anyone seen this building before? 1, 2, 3, 4. Where is it? Jaipur. Yeah, exactly. This is the Hawa Mahal in Jaipur. And it kind of is lucky that this is one of the most recognizable bits of architecture in Rajasthan that one could know about. And so this scene along the bottom of the north wall is this most extraordinary panorama of the city palace in Jaipur. And all the little tiny white dots, and I'll zoom in on those in a second, are people. And those people are about the size of the end of a small pen or biro. It's the most extraordinary thing. So what you're seeing on the screen, that dado would come up to my knees or your knees. Okay, so imagine the tiny scale of this space. But one very simple practical clue, this building wasn't finished until 1799. So we know that this room wouldn't have been made before that date. Okay, because it will be quite hard to make a depiction of a building that didn't exist yet, unless they'd snaffled the drawings in some way. And hidden in this city palace, there are a whole number of different clues and figures, sometimes with inscriptions attached to them. On the left-hand side, we can see somebody coming in a carriage out of one of the gates of the palace, and the inscription above it says Sri Ajit Singh. And on the right, we can see here a boat in a lake. There's two boats kind of floating on a lake, and everyone keeps on saying, oh, it must be Udaipur because there's a lake. But of course, there are quite a lot of lakes in Rajasthan, so it's easy to mix them up. And again, this refers to Ajit Singh. Again, I would like to emphasize to you that what you're seeing on the screen in the room here is about 30 times larger than what this is in real life. This is the sort of thing you only see with a magnifying glass. So who is Sri Ajit Singh? Well, in relationship to Ganarao, Ajit Singh was the Thakur who inherited the seat of Ganarao in 1799. But was almost immediately exiled. So the Mansingh of Jodhpur took over the town of Ganarao, used the castle as a barracks, and Ajit Singh himself was sent into exile until 2011, and he was a kind of small child at that age. And so we know that things that contain the story of Ajit Singh probably won't have been put there during the period of his exile. Okay, so there's another possible clue. The third clue are these curious figures in their red coats and their white trousers with their pale skin and their cannons and their long black boots. And they are, of course, soldiers and agents of the British East India Company, who precisely during this time were conducting negotiations with the various rulers of the various kingdoms of what we now call Rajasthan. And in particular, they had two big kind of diplomatic events, one in 1803 and one in 1818 in Jaipur. And what they were attempting to do, the British at this time, was not to conquer Rajasthan rather like an invading army, but instead to dominate that part of the country by making treaties with each of the rulers. And they said, we'll prop you up with money and troops, and you can do what you like, but just don't say anything, don't complain about anything we do. Okay, so it was a kind of slightly deadly thing. But I think what's fascinating here is these visions, these tiny, tiny little figures. And what's kind of curious about them is that we only ever see them. They're never in the middle of the scene. They're always off towards the edge. So apologies to those two on Zoom, but if you look at the top right-hand side of the picture here, that is the British Army. Okay, so all these people, nothing to do with the British, they're not interested, they don't care. And there's a few foreigners in a tiny courtyard on the side. Yes, I think so. Yeah, and I'll come to who it might be in a second. So it's kind of interesting here. This is a picture of the kind of formation of a part of the British Raj, the British Empire, before the British Empire, and before anyone kind of knew or could anticipate in this part of the world what it was going to be like. So what about the South Wall? It's the mirror of the North. You can see all the weird things of this digital scanning thing. It does all sorts of bizarre things. What does it tell us? So firstly, on the left-hand side, facing Krishna on the niche is a figure. It's the one you can see in the middle. It's a bit hard to see, of a man wearing a turban made of glass, and then where there are little holes all over the plaster behind the glass, that's where there were jewels, and they've all been picked out while the room was abandoned. And the inscription tells us also that this is the Thakur Ajit Singh, so in middle age, and therefore after his return from exile. And what we have in the niche next door to that is this rather beautiful wall painting on plaster of the Thakur and his son Pratap, who, if he's about 10 here, this would have been in the kind of 1820s. Okay. And finally, on this side of the room, nearly, we have these images of more company agents turning up. It's like the kind of they're pretending they're from Amazon, but actually they're going to take over the world. And these relate to a particular incident related by a British historian of Rajasthan in the 1820s and 30s, a character called James Todd. Can anyone tell me who's the great Maharaja of Mewar, of Udaipur, the one with his horse? So, yeah, absolutely. And the great story of Pratap Singh and Chetak and all these kind of things, in a sense, is a story that was largely broadcasted by this guy, James Todd, in the 1820s when he was writing histories of Rajasthan. It was then a story that got picked up when Todd's book was republished in Calcutta in the 1870s as a story of Indian nationalism, of a hero who was fighting back against a great empire, and thus a book written by an imperialist was used to fight against the empire. But Todd is a fascinating character in his own right, and in 1821, crossing over those hills which you saw in the photograph, he comes down to Ganarao, meets the Thakur Ajit, and Ajit says, "You must come into my house, come and see my lovely new room," and he says, "No, thank you," because he wants to avoid a diplomatic incident with those other pesky people in Jodhpur, with whom he's in trouble. And then we have here in another glass palace below, down next to the floor, and again these tiny figures, Ajit Singh as an old man, and on the left-hand side you can see a younger man and a child, and the young man, it says Pratap Kunwar, that's Pratap the prince, his son. And the little child is Nahar Maharaj, because Pratap died the year before his father, and Nahar, the grandson, took over. And what we think is that is the time at which the room became unfinished. There's a kind of family story that on the death of Pratap, stricken by grief, the father gave up his project for the building for the palace for his county, and in a sense left it for a while, so nothing more was done. And this palace is in a completely different style to the one we saw in Jaipur, for example, and so it's probably something done by Nahar rather later in the 19th century. Next, I want to look at a very different sort of mystery, which is in the niche next door. There's this little niche. And this is the one that we've just seen, the head of the princess, and also this other very curious image that you can see here. And when I was there in 2019, certainly I was very perplexed by this image. I asked the family, who is this person? And they said, oh, it's the Emperor of Britain. And then the woman is somebody else, unidentified, but they thought probably the Queen. But what's very curious about this picture is, while it's clearly a painting of a white man sitting on a European chair, it by no means looks like a European painting. And I want to just talk you through the unravelment of this particular mystery, because it tells us an extraordinary thing about this room, where it is and its position in space and time. And this is very much building on Anne-Marie Bannister's work. She's somebody who has an extraordinary forensic detective eye. She knows how to find sales catalogues and collections and archives and all those sorts of things that, in a sense, are kind of gobbledygook to me. And she's been able to kind of pick apart a lot of this story. And what happened? So I was doing these drawings. I was talking to Anne-Marie about this. And then at some point, in the autumn of 2020, she rang me up and she said, I can hardly breathe because I want to show you something that I've just found, which is this, an almost completely identical painting. Except this painting wasn't in the room in Rajasthan, this was in London, in the Museum of Freemasonry in the centre of London. And we looked a bit further, and when you looked on the back, it had these two inscriptions on it. So the label on the left is what we've deciphered as kind of the dealer's marks, describing the content of the picture and when it was sold, which was in the 1950s, and so on. But the other one on the right is a complete mystery, because it's clearly Mandarin or Chinese of some sort. And yet, when I show it when we've shown it to my Chinese students or in all sorts of places, they can't decipher it. So it's signed by a Chinese artist, sold by a Gujarati dealer. The person who deciphered this most easily was somebody from Kutch, interestingly, more of which later. And this duplicate of this picture. So there's a picture in Ganarao in the Aravalli Hills. There's a picture in the Freemasons' Hall in London. And then we held our breath even more, because it turns out that that picture in London is deliberately a copy of this one by the painter Edmund Scott. And what it shows is the Prince Regent, not the King of England, but his son, painted in 1799 as Grand Master of the Order of Freemasons. So Freemasons, to explain, are a kind of, to call them an NGO would be really weird. They're not, or a secret society might be really weird, because they're not quite secret, but they're kind of a non-religious religious group where men would meet and discuss things. And they had a huge role, as we will see, in the way that the kind of British colonial enterprise was run at this time. And this painting by Edmund Scott, in it, the Prince Regent is sitting on a throne, and that throne can also be found in the Museum of Freemasonry in London, while the portrait itself of Edmund Scott is housed in the Brighton Museum, which is just next door to this building. And this building is one of the weirdest things in British architecture. It was built by the Prince Regent as a Mughal palace for himself, except it's Mughal on the outside and Chinese on the inside, just like the painting. So it's a kind of extraordinary circular irony. So what about this Chinese kind of connection? Well, then we found another one, or then Anne-Marie found another one, which is this one, painted on glass, which is a copy of the Scott painting, albeit a more accurate copy. And on the reverse of that, there is an inscription which explains that this picture had been commissioned by a tea merchant called Edmund Larkin in Canton, Guangzhou, now Guangzhou, in 1800, and it had been commissioned by him from the Chinese painter Fatqua, who was a well-known painter in China at that time. And it was commissioned in order, we think, to be given as a gift to the Prince Regent at that time. So I'm trying to tot up how many copies we've got so far. So we have the one in Ganarau, we have the one in Freemasons, so we've got the Scott painting, we've got Fatqua's painting here. And then a month ago, I went to visit this one. It was my favorite version, which is somewhere else that might seem out of the way, but it's actually tremendously important to the story. And that is Bhuj in Gujarat. I don't know if any of you have been to Bhuj or to the Rann of Kutch. You have, yeah. And in Bhuj, it's a small town, there is two of the weirdest palaces I've ever seen in my whole life. So one of them looks like the Houses of Parliament in London, and is a kind of Victorian Gothic thing, rather like Bombay University. And the other one is much older, an 18th century palace, which is filled with European paintings and mirrors. In fact, hundreds and hundreds of mirrors, and not just mirrors, but Chinese paintings on glass. And in Bhuj, they tell a story. They tell a story about how this room came to be, and it's the story of somebody called Ram Singh Mullam. And Ram Singh Mullam was a sailor from Saurashtra, and I want you to imagine that there's no border with Pakistan, okay? And that before 1947, the whole coast, up from Kerala, up to Bombay, up around Gujarat, over the water to Karachi, then to Iran, then to the Gulf, then around to Zanzibar and Kenya and Mombasa and all those kind of things. That was a whole world which was very connected. So there are a load of Africans, for example, living in Gujarat, the cities, who come as this kind of process of connection. And Ram Singh Mullam was one of these sailors. And what happened to him, somewhere off the east coast of Africa, he's shipwrecked in about 1750. And he disappears for 20 years. And he comes back to Saurashtra with stories of the extraordinary places he's been. And he's actually been in Holland for around 20 years. And in Holland, he's learned how to make glass. He's learned how to make machinery. He's learned all these kind of technological marvels. And he takes them to the court of the Rao of Kutch, the king of Kutch, and says, I'll build you this fantasy palace with all this modern European technology, like mirrors and prints and glass and so on. And so while nowadays, Kutch might seem like quite a remote place on the western edge of India, in the 18th century, it was in the middle of everything. It was in the middle of everything, because if you're traveling by sea, that is the way that you could get everywhere between east and west. And so perhaps this little Prince Regent is brought actually by a Kutchi sailor. And what we get is wonderful stories that James Todd tells as he travels through Gujarat and southern Rajasthan, of turning up in all these palaces in that part of the world. And going, and they've got clocks and mirrors and pictures of the Queen of England and all this kind of stuff. And he's going, where did they get all this stuff? Because it wasn't coming from the Europeans. It wasn't coming from the Europeans. It was Chinese and Gujarati ships that are carrying this stuff around the world. And finally, just to put one on the icing on the cake, this one was recently sold in Philadelphia, because the other place that all those sailors went was across the Pacific in the other direction. And they sold Chinese glass paintings of George Washington to the Americans quite frequently as well. And so when we look at the process of the princess, it becomes an even more kind of curious story, because actually her image is a composite of many portraits of Queen Charlotte, who's actually the Prince Regent's mother. And we have these. And so my mystery, I suppose, is how did these things arrive in a place like Ganara? Okay, how did they make their way inland from the ports of Western India, or were they painted in the ports of Western India? So when I arrived here about a month ago, 6 weeks ago, I did a good old rummage around junk shops. If any of you are interested in antiques and antiquities, go to Chor Bazaar in Bombay, if you go to Bombay, and go to Mutton Lane, a tiny little alleyway called Mutton Lane, and it's got the most incredible junk shops. You can buy film posters and cigarette packets and cassette tapes with old Bollywood hits on them, or whatever you want, and glass paintings. There's loads of glass paintings hidden in there. And I was speaking to the dealer and saying, where do you get them? He goes, oh, they keep on turning up in houses in the west of India. And what happened eventually is it turns out that a lot of the Chinese artists came to settle in Western India, and they would move from court to court. So they would go from Kutch to Ganara to Jodhpur and whatever, and so on. And so built into this tiny room in the middle of nowhere is a story about a whole global network of trade. This room isn't just an isolated, picturesque, provincial form. It's actually something that is sitting at the set of networks that connect all sorts of different places. Here's an example of one of the kind of Indian paintings that are then produced by the Chinese painters when they settle down. And on the right is one that's built into the wall of the room. So who connected these paintings? Well, I have a theory, I'm only putting it out there, but it's probably not right, is that actually this might not have been Ajit Singh, who the parts of the room that relate to him are kind of very rather classical kind of Rajasthani painting rooms, but actually it was his son Pratap, who was an amateur artist, quite an unusual thing for a prince to be in the early 19th century. And Rosemary Krill, the art historian, writes about his particular taste in what was then kind of understood to be kind of modern art. And so these paintings are built into the room as examples of modern art. And so I suppose that takes us back to these mysteries, these things that are there before the period. Are these paintings from before Ajit? Are they from the previous generation and they were cut off? Or are they paintings that are unfinished at the moment of his son's death? And that leaves, of course, a similar mystery about what do we do now? What do we do now with such a place? Quite interesting graffiti here. JWS, 20th of August, 1906, stopped on his art trip. So it's graffiti now that's 120 years old, painted onto the walls of the room. So having gathered this information, having made the drawings, then what I tried to do was kind of story the room. So kind of to imagine that the stories I've been telling you, whether they're of Ram Singh Malam going off into the sea and disappearing off and coming back with fabulous Marco Polo-like tales of Holland, or whether it's the story of Larkin, the tea merchant, crossing the world, or of Ajit Singh or his son Pratap. How do we make and tell these stories? And so when I was assembling the images of the room, the idea was to imagine that each image that I collaged into those very large-scale drawings was a story. And so in a geeky way, any Photoshop digi-geeks out here, these Photoshop files are kind of like little encyclopedias where you can kind of read each story of each image that's put in there. And they might be of James Todd. They might be of Krishna and Radha, and a whole story I haven't told you about the Saint Mirabai, who was a relation of the family who kind of ran away from her destiny as a royal princess to marry Krishna and become a preacher in the country. Okay. And so very briefly, what I'm working on now is thinking about kind of stories. Okay, so quite simply, and each of these stories, these are very short versions of the story, relate to meeting a person in that first week when I was there. So the steward, Ket Singh Ji, who showed me the room the first time. The Takarani, with whom I talked in particular about the story of Mirabai in relationship to the room. The Thakur himself, who explained to me the dynastic politics of the room. James Todd, the explorer who never got there in 1821. And finally, the Kunwa, with whom I'm discussing the future of the room. And that led me to the animations that I'd been making before, which you've seen, where I was kind of trying to, in a sense, trace, using a piece of software called Prezi, trace the stories over the room. So I want you to imagine, and sometimes never ever underestimate the power of a guide to a room. A guide is somebody who can conjure up magic from any old cardboard box, any room. They can go, that's the door, that's the ceiling, whatever it might be. How do you storytell a room? How do you speak it into existence? And these are attempts to use the drawings to do this. And so the next move came when I arrived here. So that was all work that took place during lockdown. And then, as I mentioned, sort of came back to India about 6 weeks ago. And what I've been working on is these drawings over 3 years, effectively. And what I've kept on feeling was, why am I looking at this bleeding thing in the middle of a computer screen? You know, this is 2023. Haven't we looked at computer screens enough times already? Wouldn't it be great if we could actually experience something in real life? And so when I arrived in Bombay, that's exactly what I did with the drawings. So I'm sorry that I can't do this bit in a hybrid way, but I'm going to be, I've become a kind of traveling sari salesman. I've got the right bag. And what I've been making are these banners of the room, so that you can get a sense of this room. So here's our prince, and on the other side of the niche, here is our princess. Okay, and this is all one-to-one. I was very, very worried. I'm going to do that thing like a proper fabric cell. And this one is, yeah, so here are all the stories of Krishna. So in this niche, we have Krishna as the herdsman in the branch, and then he's holding up a mountain of Govardhan with the finger to shelter from the storm. So here's Indra in his chariot. You can have that one. And here we have Ajit Singh. No, we don't. Here we have the ruins. Here we have the ruins. Okay, and the paintings that were never made. Okay. I'll see if I can do this. Oh no, it went the wrong direction. And then here, not quite finally. Here we have Ajit Singh. And here he is in the prime of his reign. And then at the bottom, those little worlds, those little palaces where his succession is being discussed. Okay. Look at that one. And I think there's one more, yes. I'm very, very sorry about this, everybody. Hybrid. Got to be 6. But I'll show you what they look like in a second. And here is the kind of unknown kind of Indian Chinese painting in the shrine at the top. And then at the bottom, one of these kind of unknown landscapes, one of these unknown palaces. And it was, and so the idea was very much, by making the room, what I've had this extraordinary experience in the last month, because having printed out the room or part of the room in this way, I've then been carrying it around the country, doing exactly what I've been doing with you, which is kind of bringing it out of the bag and showing it to people and sharing it with people. And what I love seeing, and I hope you don't mind, I am just, if you would prefer me not to photograph, just put your hand up. Is anyone, you're okay to just take a picture? But just keep looking at them, because actually, kind of what I'm fascinated about is the way that stories aren't just things which are written, they're not just things which are heard digitally, but that, like a guide, stories are things which can be touched and felt and experienced in terms of atmosphere. So here is the room put up in one of the Havelis in the old town of Ahmedabad, and a kind of one of those courtyards where you could kind of hang everything through. Hanging them up in a courtyard in Bombay was where I met Sue Miller, which is why I'm here today. And then, of course, there was the wonderful opportunity to start to take this stuff back to the room itself, and so to project the stories themselves back into the room and for the people that are from there. So what was a real delight was, in a sense, to bring these stories back to this glass room and to animate it in some way, and to do that digitally, and then also using the fabrics themselves. And what that begins to suggest, and I started this by not knowing what to do or what the future of this room might be, and I still don't know the permanent answer, but I do know a temporary answer, an ephemeral answer, an interior answer, which is that you can animate places in these ways. You don't have to come up with a permanent solution, because there probably isn't a permanent solution for a place like this. You can come up with kind of temporary, usable solutions. And so the idea, and then by other great good fortune, when I was just back in the room, it turns out that the chair of Ajit Singh, the man who made the room, which is this rather fantastic kind of early 19th century chair with kind of leopards or lions as the arms, became this perfect place to kind of animate the space using the textiles within the room, and to tell these different stories within it. So I started this lecture with the idea that all things are temporary, all things will pass away. And it's true, all things are temporary and all things will pass away. When I went back to this room in the last 2 weeks, there's less of it there than there was in 2019. I know that that will be also the case when I next go there. But at the same time, we agreed some very simple strategies. It sounds like a weird strategy, but for example, every time the cleaners had gone in there to sweep the floor, what they'd done is picked up the rubbish from the floor and thrown it away. I said, don't throw it away. Keep all the glass you find in the room so that it doesn't leave it. You know, you might be able to put it back together again. A very, very simple strategy. And they are now working with sort of, they're getting a report made on the room to kind of look at it and options for it in a little more detail. But I suppose the contribution I'm trying to suggest is that maybe we can't physically preserve this room. And maybe what we certainly shouldn't do is, in order to preserve it, is pack it up and put it in a museum somewhere. That would be the worst possible thing you can conceivably do to something like this, which has arisen out of the place that it was in, which is utterly connected to the place which it is in. Okay, it could end up in the Met. That would be a disaster, as far as I'm concerned. You know, actually, this is of and about this place. And so, in a sense, what's absolutely crucial here is knowledge about it. Is how do we share knowledge about it? And that might be historical knowledge. It might be so the kind of stories we've been finding out. It could be something like the measure drawings produced, but it's also, in a sense, the stories. So to finish, I'd really just like to send you out with a task, which is, when you go back home, look at one of the rooms that you're in. If you're in a student bedroom, it's probably about the same size as this room. Okay, so this room is about the same size as a student bedroom. Okay, And I'd like you to imagine all the lives that have happened in that room before you got there, and all the lives that will happen after. And I'd like you to imagine all the other things, the other possibilities that room might hold. I'd like you to imagine, even in this room, what was happening 2 hours ago in here, what will be happening in 4 hours in the afternoon. And to imagine, in a sense, rooms and interiors in this way as kind of seas of stories in which we can, if we navigate through them, we can begin to find all sorts of, rather like Ramsing Mallam, new countries and new possibilities. So I'll finish there. But thank you very much. Yeah, so what I will do is unshare the screen, maybe. We can see if there's any questions here.
Questions before we come to here. But thank you, first of all, thank you so much. I mean, this is part of the class, and the title is also part of the research theme. And it's entitled Material Works. And it really is exactly what we've been doing. We've brought the whole world in a tiny room. And usually we go much faster. And there's so many questions. Also in the beginning, when we talked about, we called it a manor house. There was a palace. How do we even talk about that? How do we make sense of it? How do we read the room? And I think this kind of example work is really amazing. We all have to admit. And then what you do with it, with that knowledge, that you're bringing this slide, because ultimately we want to do this also so that we can make more sense of these rooms for the visitors. And I think the textiles are just a wonderful idea. We thought about science, it's so hard somehow, you can fall over it, it's intimidating. But I think the textiles are incredibly creative solution. So first of all, this comment. Now questions, and we have questions from the audience. I look at the Zoom audience as well.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe you look at your Zoom.
Yeah.
Love to hear comments and questions.
There's just a mic here, actually. We might try the... I'll repeat the questions anyway. Yeah. Yeah, did you yeah, go and yeah.
I was reminded of my Weissman's book actually, and what he does to forensic architecture. It's just this very close looking and reading of the space. And then at the same time, I was wondering the spirit of the right? Like this film is so much about there's a lot of sense of wonder. There's a lot of sense of partnership. And there isn't, I mean, what you did with it as the installation. So the detective work sort of ended when the drawings were made, and you called it like a sari salesman, but the minute that we see that salesman into that room, it went into this very Shannon monologue, bringing the space back to life with and it's also very different that, there isn't that sense of bringing back to that scene. And I'm very curious to know what this sense of wonder did to the people who live there, who have seen this place before and after. What did you also in reference to what Esther was talking about? And how does this thing help the business? Does it help the business? Is it meant to help the business? It doesn't even have to.
Very good question. So I'll just repeat it for our Zoom audience, just in case you couldn't hear it. But so the question was firstly about kind of looking and kind of forensic looking, and then analysis, making the drawings, doing the historical research, and so on. And then you said, and then I went into shaman mode, and I appreciate that. Yeah. And in a sense, it becomes less critical and more about kind of trying to incite wonder or value. And the question was, what's the value of that for the people who live there, for the household of Ganarao? my response to that would be, I think, first of all, their response to me was that it was something about a gift. So I kind of made sure that all the data you've seen, I've made sure is given to them, so that it's kind of, they have the textiles, they have the drawings, they have all the notes and so on, so that they possess that stuff. It doesn't belong to me, because effectively it belongs to the room, and they also belong to the room. It made them talk and value the room. The comments yesterday, we were having a chat, and they were going, we hadn't really thought that this room was important or valuable in any way, and I recognize that is not necessarily a good thing, you know, because that also places a burden on people. And I've not turned up with a solution or £1 million to solve the problem. And so that becomes the next kind of question, and it is probably one that I'm not competent to answer, as I'm not a practicing conservationist in that way. But in terms of how does it relate to their kind of business, I mean, I suppose one has to ask a question of what is the business of a takur, in the sense that it's not just monetary. The task, the career is of somebody in an ancestral place is partly related to that place, irrespective of kind of the hotel business, which it also might be, and which it's useful for. So, for example, they are working on establishing a museum at the moment, and this material, they're saying, is kind of useful to them in order to do that. There's another thing which is kind of also to do with their response, is that and this is kind of more what can they give to me, which is already obviously a huge amount, but it's actually their response to the stories in itself is really, really important. When you tell a story, you can't tell it into a vacuum, you have to tell it to an audience. And so actually getting a sense of what they pick up on, or what they felt was important or less important, then became kind of series of things. What is the currency of wonder? Wow, that's a bit deep. The current, I mean, I could put it in a kind of very bald way, that in tourism, the currency of wonder is the currency of tourism, because you know, you're not going there because it's hotter or because the bed's more comfortable. You go to Venice because not because it's convenient and quick, but because it incites wonder. You go to the Taj Mahal at 5 o'clock in the morning for wonder, and that's the business model. And in a kind of cynical way, but obviously wonder goes beyond that in itself as well. Yeah.
Slide 123.
Joachim, if you would like to ask a question.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Thanks for this absolutely fascinating talk. I could tell I'm working in the area since 45 years, and I have witnessed very, very similar premises. But allow me a question about one of your slides. I think it is number 23.
Mm-hmm.
Could you show this again, or do you have it in mind?
Is that visible? Oh, it's not. Just a sec. I'll see if I can do it. Okay, I'm just bringing up the slides now. Okay, it'll just take a bit of a while to come back. Getting there.
Oh, sorry.
It's all right. Do you mean this one?
Yes, thank you.
Yes. Yes. Okay.
This is a sort of split thing. There is I see a chariot coming out from a city on the left, and on the right, I see this boat.
Yes.
Who is Sri Maharaja Jagat Singh Ji? This is what the inscription says.
On the right-hand side. Yes, I don't know. I'm not sure about that one. Because I was looking at the different dates of who that, which Jagat Singh that might be, and of course there are lots of different ones from different kingdoms at different times. So I don't know the answer to that. Yeah, the scene there is set in Jaipur or outside Jaipur.
Well, this is a difference. It looks like the Tripolia of Jaipur. I worked in Jaipur quite some time, so now it's city.
Yeah.
But since we are already at slide number 23, can you go to the next, please?
The next
24.
Here, yeah.
Yes, thanks so much. Now the people there in their red uniforms, they are not necessarily British. Several Rajput courts had their own armies dressed in British uniforms.
Okay,
For
that's very
instance,
interesting. Yeah.
For instance, the army of Kota was called Ardali Paltan, which means orderly platoon. and it was dressed like the British. And I think it's the next one where you said 25, I'm not sure, something about, no. Well, you're showing a photograph where you said something about Colonel James Todd.
Yes, here.
This one, actually, yes, Captain James Todd. Well, I'm afraid none of these persons shows really Captain James Todd, because we have him in engravings and we have him in Rajasthani paintings. He doesn't look like this, never, to the best of my knowledge, of course. And the annals and antiquities of Rajasthan, which were published in 1829 and 1832, they are now republished with an interesting commentary volume where all these issues about identification of James Todd and these things will be discussed. And the interesting thing is, you mentioned Todd's reprint from 1870, which is an altered text. The new edition will publish the original text and all the material which is available from the period of Captain James Todd. So I don't know if it's already published. I think it was announced for the beginning of this year. It's not an inexpensive edition, because it took lots of work to reassemble all the material. But there, somebody is this the interior of a chariot, or is this the interior of a howdah on an elephant? I don't know.
Yeah, we don't know, because the bottom part of the image has come away here. So yeah, and actually the very frustrating thing is that you see the glass pieces of mosaic around it here. They seem to represent part of some palace, but there's only a very small part of it. Most of the rest of it has actually disappeared at that point. And so that's kind of frustrating. Yeah, I think it would be. I completely agree with you that there's no way of saying, well, that is James Todd himself in the image. I think what I was trying to suggest was that he comes here in this location. So in the slide that you can see now, do you see on the right hand side, just next to the red cushion, that's where that bit of painting we've been looking at is. And then there's a part of the wall, a mural, which has disappeared just to the right of it.
Well, the fascinating thing about your talk is that this room offers really so many layers. It's like an onion.
Yeah.
And I have seen several rooms where at a glance, when you first entered the room, you did not see anything. Because many of these rooms, which were previously decorated with murals, were whitewashed.
Yeah, yeah.
And there are so many rooms in Rajasthani palaces where the whitewash can be literally washed away with just water, because it's not this whitewash which is very difficult to remove, which one uses today. But the old whitewash can be removed, and one can rediscover paintings from this wall paintings from the 17th century. So, but this room is really fascinating, small but very interesting, especially
incredibly dense.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. That's really useful thoughts there, and really useful points of fact as well.
Well, I thank you for your very, very special talk. Thank you so much. It was
pleasure.
worth getting up this morning.
Yeah, thank you for joining us all the way from Germany. That was great.
What would the room have been used for?
That's a very, very good question. And it's a room in two parts. So there's a kind of inner room and an outer room. And what they told me is that the inner room certainly was a shrine to Krishna. And that said, then they kind of weren't sure. So they were kind of going, well, it's a shrine to Krishna. And then they're going, well, it could have been a kind of room for the women coming over. So it's in the men's part of the palace, but there was a way for the women to come from the women's part of the palace to this part invisibly. And then they could watch concerts in the courtyard down below. And so they think it might have been used for that. My feeling about that is that if one thinks of kind of rooms 200 years ago, people didn't necessarily allocate a single function to a room. So they didn't necessarily say, here's my bedroom, here's my sitting room, here's my gym, here's my study, but that actually they might do all sorts of things in a room. And if you think, very often in a traditional Indian house, you might walk in and there will be a shrine in the sitting room or in between the sitting room and the kitchen, and that actually in some senses, I can imagine this room being used for all sorts of different events throughout the day. I think one of the clues is that all the detail, the tiny detail, is really low down. So it's in the bottom half of the wall, and what that's telling me is that people were sitting on the floor, because then their eye level would have been there, and then when they stand up, they see the bigger picture. But it's a very interesting. Yes, I don't know the answer actually, but in a sense, except to observe that rooms tended to be more flexible than they are today and used for more different things. Thank you. Anything else? Some of us need your lunch, some of us need your breakfast. Great, well, thank you very much, everybody, and thank you, Mimi, for inviting me. Okay. So I'm going to switch slides to leave here. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.